Alright guys, James from Act Audio. We are about to start our video on how to integrate into factory OEM systems and what type of device do we need to use. In the past we used standard locks and it was very simple, but this day and age it's very rare that we use them. So I got an array over here that I will go over in a second. What we are using is this Nissan Maxima with the Bose system. So it's got a lot going on. It's a pretty complicated car and we are going to dive in.
So real quick, I just want to touch base on signal input. I'm going to talk about it a lot in this video. Basically, your radio puts out a signal. Sometimes, in the old days, the radio signals was usually pretty flat, pretty easy to work with. These days, we have all sorts of hurdles. We have, different features of the car, door chimes, navigation, Bluetooth, all those things are interfaced differently. The signals have different crossover points and frequencies, so it's not as easy. So the signal that we're talking is a signal from your head unit to your amp, factory amp, and then you signal from your factory amp out to the car. And we're going to typically grab your signal from one of those points. Every car is different. Some cars you can't grab it before the amp. Some cars it's best to grab it before the amp. But without getting your testing tools out and going through and figuring it out, you can never tell. So we talked about the signal in, so if you guys want to take a look at this here.
This is a full range signal, and basically what we're looking at is this is all the spectrum of sound. So if you actually keep it here, if you look at this, down here is your bass, this is your mid, and this is your treble. And you want this to be fairly uniform. Basses are usually a little heavy. Here we can turn on a filter, and a lot of factory radios are filtered. So if you look back at the RTA here, we actually lost our bass. So you'll see when we go back to this Maxima that some of the channels are losing bass. So basically those locks that we talked about, line out converters that we talked about, duplicate exactly what's put into them. So a good bass signal, if I come here, turn the volume down a little. This is a decent bass signal, but you can see we're losing a little bit around the 20 hertz. We're analyzing a sub signal and it's pretty good. So when we use those locks that I just showed you, it's going to put out exactly what we put in. But say we put this into it, we're actually going to get nothing for bass, and you're going to have really poor bass response. Here, you're going to get good bass response, but we're actually lacking a little in the very, very low bass. So when little John gets low, you're not getting very low. The next pieces we're going to talk about are going to cover that. All right, so what we have here is your basic setups. This is your basic lock. This is your LP7-2. These basically put out exactly what you put in. The difference is this has a turn on. So when it senses the input, it'll allow power to be put out to turn the amps on. This one you have to turn them on manually if the amp doesn't have signal sensing, and it can cause a lot of popping and other noise, unwanted noise in the system. This also generally allows a higher input. I'd have to find the specs, but it allows you to put in a higher input. So if you're hooking it up to an amplified system, you can, this will handle it. This one does too, but as you can see, it only handles up to 50 watts. So if you have more than 50 watts coming out of the factory amp, you gotta go to this one. So let me show you what I'm talking about here.
So our next two pieces we have here is the Memphis bass expander and the audio control LC2i. Ultimately, this bass expander is going to recreate frequencies on the lower spectrum. So if your radio doesn't put out that super, super low bass, this isn't going to recreate it. You do need to put in higher mid bass, up to 500 hertz is what they want, in order for it to recreate that lower bass. So basically it sees what's going on in the higher spectrum and guesstimates what's going to happen in the lower spectrum. And it does have adjustments, so you can fine tune it to your system, and it comes with the bass knob. This guy also acts as a line driver, so it'll push higher voltage into your amp, allowing your amp to run more efficient, so you don't have to adjust your gain as much. The next one is your audio control LC2i. It's virtually the same thing as the bass expander and has the line driver built in as well. The big difference here is it has patent technology called AccuBass. With AccuBass, what it does is, I'll put a clip in and you can see, when you're, so this is your bass in a car, this is your mid and treble, right? And when your bass is down lower, or your volume's down lower, the bass is higher. And as you turn it up, that bass stops turning up, and the mid and treble start to outweigh it. On your factory system, you don't notice it. You add an amp and sub, now you notice it. And if you've ever hooked up a amp and sub to a factory radio, and as you turn it up, the sub doesn't turn up as much, that's why. So this will allow us, we get to that certain point where it stops turning up. There's an adjustment on the side here. We go in, we tell this where that point is, and it'll recreate the bass, allowing that bass to continue going up, giving you that maximum full sound, and you're not always playing with the bass knob. Making that install and that system perform more flawlessly. And this is the bass, you know how heavy that bass is compared to the treble. Turn it up just a tiny bit more, Ethan. Right, so that bass is still a little heavier than the treble or the rest of the sound. Now go up all the way and watch the bass drop. How the mid went way higher than the bass once we turned it up. The last two devices we have here are a summing device and a DSP. The summing device will allow you to take multiple inputs, combine them into one input, and put them out. So if you got a very processed system that doesn't have that good full range of signal that you're looking for in one part, because these only allow, you know, they only allow two speakers in. This allows multiple speakers in. And it'll take all the different signals, or at least the parts of the signals, and combine them into one clean signal output. This one here does the same thing, but on a higher scale. It takes 3 channels in, and it spits out up to 4 channels. And it allows you to take all different signals. You can sum them. It also allows you to fully control your system. We're going to talk about this in another video, but it gives you full control over sound waves, summing, crossovers, equalization. I mean, this is your Mac Daddy if you want to have that sound quality system and put that concert live on your dashboard with perfect smooth sound. This is what we use. But we'll talk about that in another video. So I'm just gonna pop in here, and I want to talk about a part that I don't have here to show you guys, but it's becoming more and more common. A lot of these cars, they have digital input to the amps, and the actual radio of the car does not control your fade or your balance and all those things anymore. So it's a fixed level into the amp. So as you turn your volume up, it doesn't turn up or down. It's a fixed level, or it's a fiber optic system, or a CAN bus system. We have some companies that create these devices. Nav TV's one, PAC one, they have the Amp Pro, and these devices actually interface that, and they read your radio, so your controls, and they duplicate what it's doing in the amp. And it allows us to seamlessly go in, keeping those controls intact. Also, what it does is, if you have Bluetooth and it comes through one specific speaker, you have door chimes, you have navigation, there's other things your car could have, and it's all controlled by your amplifier digitally. This piece will plug in, and it'll give us the proper way, give us the proper interface so that we can have a nice flat sound. It's not even equalized, it's perfect sound out, and gives us the perfect foundation. These pieces cost a bit more than a lot of standard pieces. You're talking usually $4, $5, sometimes more $100, but they give us a perfect sound, maintaining everything in the car, compromising nothing, and usually cost you a little less on your install time. And they're kind of becoming a bigger go-to piece for us. Let's go. So when we were talking about using a summing device, I'll show you why in a second. So this Nissan has multiple channels, multiple speakers, and each channel and each speaker has its own part of the signal. And we want a full range signal so that we can amplify it. So I'm going to show you here that we're going to go in and we're going to test a couple of the speakers that we have hooked up, and you can see on the meter how each one is individual. So you watch here, watch that screen. We're going to test the first one, and it's kind of like a mid-range speaker, giving us about 150, not even, about 300 to 3,000 hertz. We'll check the next one. There might be a duplicate in here, forewarning. Go figure. Grab the duplicate. This one's kind of bassy, so it's got your bass. That's good for a sub.
but not for mids and highs. And there's another one in here, I'm not gonna bore you guys on camera, that's highs. But we're gonna take these and we're gonna run them all together and combine them and create that full sound that I was showing you earlier of 20 to 20,000 hertz that we want to hear with those summing devices or that DSP. In this situation, you can see we use the DSP. Let me see that camera. So as you can see, we come in here for the DSP, and we're using a full cal. And right now we have everything labeled, but these are our inputs from all the different speakers of the car. They all have different signal. We're gonna plug them in, and we're gonna output a full range. So you guys saw all the different inputs. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna plug these back in, and I'll show you what we've combined as our output. All right, so now we're testing the output, and as you can see, we need some work to get this flattened out. Oh, the system just shut down, but you saw it. You know, we had a much better range. It wasn't segmented like the inputs were. It was summed together. So now with the DSP, we'll be able to go in and even that out a bit. There was no bass there because that was the 4-channel amp, and the sub amp is over here producing the bass. So we intentionally left the bass out of there, but that's what a summing device or a DSP can do. So as you can see, there's a lot of different devices that we use depending on the situation to integrate into your factory system. I hope that made sense. I know it might be a little unclear, but it's really hard to get a full grasp so you know exactly what's going on. Feel free to DM me or comment if you have any questions to clarify anything. I'll try to, when I go back and edit, answer any questions. The only other thing that we can talk about here is the voltage in. So a lot of these devices can handle high voltage in, and it's something we do have to measure, because if we're using a preamp before the amp or from the radio, or not preamp from the radio, but output of a standard radio, the preamp output of a radio into an amp, or the output of an amp, all have different voltages, and different cars have different voltages. You know, some BMW subs can go up to 30 volts. Most standard cars are a lot lower, but we do have to measure that and pick the device corresponding. So when people come into our store, we always generally sell them this for their vehicle. We do our testing, and then we determine the right piece. And we are very honest about it. So if you only need this, at the end of the day, this is all we'll use. But we want to quote you your worst case and give you your best case. So I hope that made sense. If you guys have any questions, again, please reach out. I know it was a lot of information. It's been very confusing. I'm going to do my best to edit this and get it so it's more coherent and add any pieces I need to in.